I'm Dr. Rob McKenna, and welcome to the WiLD Conversation, where we make the best thinking in psychology, leadership, and organizational science accessible to leaders who are willing to learn and edit for their sake and for the sake of others. Let's go. A blind spot is an area we don't see because of our inability to see something that is made worse by the reality that our brain will fill in the blanks, and psychologically speaking, often in a self-protective or self-serving way. But there is another kind of blind spot. A blind spot is also an area where we can't see because our view is being blocked. Either way, the more blind spots we have, the more we will be missing the real story of what is there for us, who we are, and how we're impacting others. And to recognize our blind spots, we have to be intentional about seeing what is actually happening, because our brains will default to creating the possibility of a literal, optical, and psychological illusion. And what is the problem with an illusion? An illusion likely has pieces of truth in it, but it is incomplete and in some cases straight out wrong. So what in the world does seeing our blind spots have to do with leadership and trust? So let's start with leaders, and let's start with us. According to a recent study by Chief Executive and Growth Play's Best Companies for Leaders survey, here is a summary of the top 10 causes of derailment, leadership derailment. So let me list these things out. Top 10 causes: a lack of teamwork and collaboration, a lack of team orientation driven by personal ambitions versus team successes, and so on. Number 2, insufficient training and development, a failure to unleash talent. Number 3, I'm going through these quickly. You don't have to get all the details, but number 3 is an ego, arrogance, micromanagement, being more interested in themselves than their reports. Number 4, no clear strategy and vision, failure to develop and execute strategy. Number 5, a lack of leadership qualities, failure to lead, develop, and inspire and engage. Number 6, an inability to change, failure to adapt, lack of flexibility. Number 7, poor leadership selection. This is about poor job alignment and leadership skills in the people we are choosing. Number 8, a lack of trust, a lack of integrity and loyalty and faithfulness. Number 9, a lack of emotional intelligence and self-awareness. Number 10, an inability to deliver results. What is common about this list of derailment factors? Each of these factors involves a lack of something, an inability to do something or see something that others must have from us, or too much of something that others don't want. It is a list of blind spots, of things that we either cannot see or have chosen to not see because of the illusion our brains have created. And according to Harvard Business Review, they would add this as predictors of derailment. Number 1, the overconfident, chronically certain leader. I love that. The overconfident, chronically certain leader, overpromising and developing unrealistic strategies. Number 2, the impulsive leader, otherwise known as the shiny object syndrome. Number 3, the rigidly controlling leader, requiring everyone to work and accomplish in a prescribed way. And number 4, the insecure leader. The insecure leader. So we are in the business of whole and intentional leader, team, and organizational development. If you're new to the WiLD Conversation, when I say we, I mean all of us. So welcome to the crew. It's we are in the business of whole and intentional leader and team development. And there are 2 things that I would love for you to note about these lists. First, leader development and knowing our blind spots is going to include a lot of things. It's a long list. We can't really ignore that. Second, like our eyes that have different blind spots, different leaders will have different and nuanced stories of their blind spots. Third, the one critical factor is that we must have a desire to see if we are to see. We cannot see things fully if we are not willing to see the whole picture for our sake and for the sake of others. And finally, seeing our blind spots is going to take a courageous and intentional investment, not only for our sake, but for the sake of others. If we default to what is easy and quick, we will become the leaders we don't trust. And that is not something I'm willing to negotiate on. We must know our blind spots and keep working at understanding them and raise up a generation of leaders who know theirs. So what happens in an organization where people are not aware of their blind spots? Those organizations have teams that spend most of their time strategizing how to work around as opposed to work ahead. Let me say that again. Those organizations have teams that spend most of their time strategizing how to work around as opposed to work ahead. Those organizations are spending too many resources on peace-mongering than progress. These organizations are often defined by irrational fear over transformational fierceness. I gotta say that one again. These organizations are often defined by irrational fear over transformational fierceness. These organizations underproduce, have people looking for ways out, and will lack the sincerity and commitment to have conversations of grace and truth. And in an organization full of people without an intentional awareness of their strengths and blind spots, that organization will find trust seeping out of it through massive gaps in its core functioning. What does this have to do with trust and building whole trust across our organizations? Trust is the relational result of individual wholeness. If I'm not seeing myself more completely, including my blind spots, it is highly unlikely that I can be trusted. And when many of us were taught to drive, we were told to always check our blind spot, to look to that place over our right shoulder to see that one place where cars sit when we're driving down the freeway. The right side is the worst blind spot when driving because of the pillar that most cars have that holds up the roof of the car. If we don't turn our heads, we miss something. And when I taught my sons to drive, I taught them to look in their blind spot. Even though our cars had backup cameras, and many now have blind spot indicators, if my sons don't use the indicator or don't turn their heads or don't look in the mirror, they create a massive trust problem. When we think about driving in blind spots, we typically, this is so fascinating. We default to what will happen to us if we were hit by another car. But what about what happens to those in that other car? Is that any less important? Of course not. But we will default to thinking of our blind spots and not the impact of our lack of awareness of our blind spots on other people. Why do we teach new drivers to stay out of the other person's blind spot? It's not just we teach people to look over the shoulder, but we talk to people, don't drive in people's blind spot, because you cannot trust that other person will actually look. Ultimately, we are responsible for each other. And if there is one driver on the road who is swerving in and out of lanes without any attention being given to their blind spots, does it impact the trust others of us feel? Of course it does. When one person isn't checking, we are all forced to react to that person as opposed to actually enjoying the drive and getting there as efficiently as possible. And energy spent managing to someone else's blind spot is exhausting. And as leaders, we must be continually reminding ourselves that our leading is about us and it's about everyone else. That realization and the steps toward changing and seeing are what build whole trust at an entirely different level. So when it comes to leading, where do we start? First, we have to make the choice to make a sacrificial investment in our own learning and getting wide open to what we don't see. The first step, I've said this so many times and I have to come back to it, is our willingness to edit, to take a hard look at what we are and what we might need to change, as well as what might need to deepen. Some things may need to actually deepen, but some things may need to change. And anyone that tells me that that's easy, I do not believe that they're looking yet. Because it's every conversation with your spouse or a trusted friend that's important, or with your team, where it gets into this it's not an easy conversation if we're asked to see things we don't see yet or are obstructed. Second, we have to get courageously vulnerable. Accept the fact that doing something different and seeing something different is going to expose you. And that is rarely fun, especially when it gets real. If you don't believe me, just think of the last time someone showed you where you screwed things up for them by something you said, or the way you didn't listen to them. And if you can't think of a personal example, consider the possibility that you haven't really seen your blind spots yet because others are hesitant to tell you where they are. It's tough, I get that, but we have to be willing to expose ourselves just a bit. And third is that don't just be open to feedback. This is the third thing. Don't just be open to feedback. Seek feedback. It's not just about being open. It's about actively seeking it. Telling people we are open and we have an open door policy does not make it so, by the way. Most of us have been around a manager like that. Most of us have all the tools, but we don't actually use them. To seek feedback is to be open to being wrong. And we know we aren't perfect, but we don't like to be reminded of that. And we're talking about whole and intentional leader development, so we got to make it a point. Fourth, make it a business imperative. Most senior leaders don't derail because they fail to leverage their strengths. There's some interesting research about this. They fail because they fail to recognize their blind spots. And if that's true, we cannot risk it. Our businesses cannot sustain leaders and teams of people who are not seeing things accurately for long. And finally, we have got to get specific. And I want to give you 3 areas of competence. I'm going to give you specific examples, and I want to invite you to rate yourself as honestly as you can on these 3 competencies. It's just 3. There's a longer list. I have a list of about 30 that we're going to show you in a moment, but here it is. The first one is this. And this is, by the way, a list of 30 competencies that are in the skills and knowledge inventory and in version 3 of the WiLD toolkit that many of you are really excited to see. Look at these areas of expertise. And I'm going to just focus in on 3 of these 30. The first one is conviction. Rate yourself on conviction. This is the knowledge of what you value and what's important to you and the ability to communicate those things to others. How do you score on conviction? The second is delegation. The ability to let other people make decisions without you, get their work done, without you over-functioning for them, and help you get things done. And the third is listening. The ability to listen to others and avoid the temptation to speak over their responses or to turn a conversation toward yourself. How did you rate yourself? On conviction, delegation, and listening. And where is your blind spot in each of these? We all have them with every area of competence and skill. A blind spot is something we don't see yet, but it impacts everyone else regardless of whether or not we see it. If we lack conviction, then our followers will not be inspired and will lack the confidence in us that will build courage and confidence in them. But conviction can also be overdone. Too much, and they will shut down. If we fail to delegate, those who we lead and live with will fail to feel that we trust them. But here's the challenge. We will still have to make strong decisions even after delegating. We must delegate, and we must also follow our gut, which is next week's WiLD conversation, by the way. And this is one of the greatest paradoxes of leadership. And finally, if we fail to listen or to hear that others are not feeling heard, especially in the hardest moments, then no one will trust us, at least not for long. We must know our blind spots. And as I said, you're going to see these lists of 30. And I just gave you 3 examples from 3.0 that's releasing in the coming weeks. Leader development efforts have often failed us because they have lacked the structures that allow us to see our nuanced story, our whole and customized story. We have different blind spots to see, but they have also failed to develop real blind spot awareness because they touch on one piece, absent the reality that different parts of our development work together to create this complex blind spots. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's hard to see because of a lot of factors going on. So we must see it whole. We must know our competencies and our areas of weakness. We must learn how to develop whole and trusted, talented people in our organizations. We must make feedback and support networks a business imperative for every person. We must know why we are, our fears, and what is hard for us to sacrifice for others. There's just so much to unpack in this. And there is more we'll talk about next week regarding what it means to trust your gut and build courage and strength as well. But without an understanding of where we are lacking, we cannot fully get there. So let's do what we do and let's continue this WiLD conversation together.